Alright, so I need to come at this one a little bit differently. Very much from the realm of unpopular opinion. Because I don't know that I can honestly rank the Dead Space trilogy by traditional means. Because there isn't really a game here that I don't like. I'm very much a fan of Dead Space collectively as a whole. I do know that Dead Space 2 has sort of universally been selected as the series' favorite. I don't feel that way. I think if I was to choose my own, I would go for the first one. It, to me, feels the most horror-y, if you will. It has that atmosphere, those long, dimly lit hallways, and tight corners. It kind of has that psychology working for it where you don't really have a full comprehension of what's happened or what you're truly up against. Yet it has all these hideously deformed creatures popping out of vents and crawling all over the place on, the walls and ceiling and such. All these things that really just kind of come to my mind immediately when I hear the name Dead Space. The second one, I think, very much is an extension of that. It builds upon what the first game brought to the dance. It just does so in a much more open, expansive environment, which is completely fine in its own right. I also know that by comparison, Dead Space 3 has been universally chosen as the worst game in the franchise and certainly the most hated. There too, I have to disagree with you. I really think that a lot of my thoughts and feelings on Dead Space 3 are quite reminiscent of those I shared about Mass Effect 3, in that I saw the hate, I was very much aware of it, but I didn't exactly understand it. Does this game have its shortcomings? Absolutely. As a creature that more often than not abides by the philosophy of if it ain't broke, don't fix it, I can agree with you that the developers made some very odd or bizarre choices and changes to the gameplay and the crafting elements here. But I will say that after I adjusted to how this game flowed, as opposed to the games that came before it, I was pretty much set to go. I was fine. And I definitely don't think that there was anything that brought this game down or killed my experience with it in any way. I do know also that one of the chief arguments against Dead Space 3 is that it's doesn't really come across as a horror game. It's much too actiony for a lot of people's blood. And if you feel that way about it, first of all, that's completely fine. That's your opinion. I respect it. And I can see that. But in response to that, I would just kind of push out there into the universe that if you feel that way, maybe then you didn't really pay close enough attention to Dead Space 2. Because what I got out of it and what I experienced from it is that if, let's just say, the original was a perfect horror experience, and the third game is kind of this pretty far removed, very detached, foreign entity that's kind of floating out in its own space, then that would make Dead Space 2 very much the midline. Now, they might be minor, they might be thoroughly mixed in there, but there are plenty of action sequences in Dead Space 2. Obviously, I very much kind of knew what I was getting into, knew what to expect with Dead Space 3 because of the internet and their very boisterous opinions of that game. But I will say that it was Dead Space 2 that kind of clearly put that writing on the wall for me. I suppose if you're not looking for it, you're not going to see it. But, you know, for me, they might as well have had a big neon sign to suggest that they were going to be changing the direction or the course of these games. And I just, after playing Dead Space 2, I just don't really see how people could be, be upset about it, sure, but I don't really see how they were surprised or blindsided by Dead Space 3 turning out the way it did, or getting what they got with it. I don't comprehend that personally, but I digress. I honestly think that the biggest reason why I'm here right now defending Dead Space 3 like I am is because of its narrative. I talked before in my Forbidden West review about, you know, kind of what makes a good or a decent build up and climax to a trilogy. I explained why that didn't really work out very well for the Fear trilogy in my ranking of that. But Fear 3 is... sorry, Dead Space 3. I got my franchises confused here. Dead Space 3 is very, very crucial to that equation. If you start from the first one, you have this seemingly abandoned ship where they bring across to you this very basic understanding of what the necromorphs are and kind of how they work and kind of how, like, this is your real nemesis throughout the game. And you know, that was going to be it, probably progressing through the series. Then you get to the second game, which introduces an infected city, an entire infected colony known as the Sprawl. And that's where you get to see kind of the overall effect of the necromorphs. You get to see the religion and kind of how, you know, that's brought across, which was a very blatant jab at Scientology, which I got a kick out of. I found absolutely hilarious and enjoyed, but that's a secondary note. But this game introduces the monoliths and kind of how they're used and how the infection of the necromorphs progresses. Then you get to the third one, where it's very much the climax of, you know, you saw the necromorphs at the start, you saw how the infection kind of works, And this is where it leads. You end up with necromorphs in their final form. When the infection is complete and they do what they've come to do, they end up to be a moon-sized monstrosity that's capable of devouring all life on the planet. And so, because Dead Space 3 kind of shows you this, it might not be the greatest game to you, but I would argue that its plot is obviously a necessity, and there is like a great build up and I guess escalation to the climax, which is at the end of that game. So, I mean, I'm not saying it's illegal to have an individual game of this series that you like or prefer more than others, but to me, I can't pick one because it flows so well as a cohesive narrative and plot that it's just like, if I think of one, I think of all. I think of the beginning, the middle of an ending of that narrative. And when I think of necromorphs, I think number one of these creepy things with the appendages that you have to shoot off, first of all, but then I also think of how they evolve to become this planet-sized, or this moon-sized entity that is able to just devour a planet and kind of everything in between. I love Dead Space, and so, I'm not trying to make waves here. I'm not trying to call anyone out or call anyone wrong. This is just my opinion of this franchise as a fan, as someone who very, very much enjoyed it, very much loves it, and someone who is looking quite forward to games like Callisto Protocol. I hope that's how you say it. I don't really remember. And the Dead Space remake. The Dead Space remake. I'm looking very forward to that, to see if my opinion on the first one changes at all, if it improves at all. I'm sure I'll let you guys know at some point. But yeah, that's what I have to say about the Dead Space series as a whole. Again, not trying to make waves or call anyone out or upset anybody, but that's my opinion. So, until next time, we'll see you later.